Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order. It's 7 o'clock. And Mrs. Carpenter, will you please call the roll?
Do you want to turn on the mics, please?
Are they not on? Can you hear me now? I'm glad Mr. Diener knows how to do that. There you go.
Miss
Thank you.
Ashley? Here. Where's Mr. Churchman?
Here.
Dr. Drummond? Here. Mr. Gilmore?
Here.
Mr. Parker?
Here.
Mr. Poland? Mrs. Wilhelm?
Here.
And we have a quorum to conduct our official business tonight, and the first item on our agenda is a public hearing regarding the 2006-07 budgets. Before we have the actual hearing, but Mr. Diener is going to make a presentation.
Thank you. Would like to point out real quickly that the board has been provided the binder for the budget development information, and hopefully that will have all the information in it that has been presented to date, and also the information that you'll be later this evening looking at for approval. It provides not only the official documents, but also the supporting documentation, and also now the guide to the proposed budget. And this is information that we historically have created for the public hearing so that our public has an access to information that talks in a narrative format, the process that we've gone through this year, and the budgets as to be presented for approval. This evening, what I'd like to do is very quickly go through just a few of the steps that we have went through for the last 9 months. I think it's important for the public to know that we didn't all of a sudden just appear here this evening and decide to approve a budget. There's been a process, and it's been lengthy and it's been informative, and hopefully we have arrived at a process, budgets that are going to meet the student needs, which we believe that it will. I'm not going to hit all the details because we've hit most of these in the past. There has been a process of providing for input, not only at the community level, but also with the board and the district level staff. This budget is going to meet many different needs for students across the district. It meets the needs of our growth of 750 students. It maintains pupil-teacher ratios. It opens a new facility. It provides compensation and benefits for our staff. It helps address issues in some of our special services with bilingual, special ed, and alternate education. It provides additional services to meet state and federal mandates that we have discussed. It addresses health and dental increases that have occurred not only here but throughout the United States, utilities, and also some restores some reductions that were created in the past. This operating budget, the budget that you'll be looking at this evening for approval, provides all of these things. We've talked about the operating funds. There are 6 different levy funds. And the general fund is based essentially on enrollment, and that's where it gets its factors. The supplemental general, one of the things that was for discussion is whether or not to utilize the full 30%. This budget reflects the full utilization there. As far as the extraordinary growth fund, the potential for using 100% is there, but this, under the board's direction, we have decided to look at 83%. That has helped impact the mill levy, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But in essence, by lowering the use of the extraordinary growth funds, we were able to use $1.3 million of reserves to help balance out the budget. And so that was sort of the balancing factor there that we used. In the capital outlay fund, we lowered that from the current level of 5 mills to 4 mills. The bond and interest and special assessments were such that they were developed to meet the needs of those particular funds, and there's not a lot of flexibility there. In the long run, essentially what it ended up was a mill levy of 65.1 mills, which reflects a 3 mill reduction. And just a reminder, once again, these are projections at this time. All we're talking about are the dollar amounts to support these budgets. Those dollar amounts then, upon approval, will be sent to the county for certification, at which point in time they will compare the amount of dollars that need to be raised to support the district funds, compare that to the assessed evaluation to determine the mill levies. And typically, they're going to be, that's going to vary a little bit, but very insignificantly. As a review for the operating budgets itself, the general and fund and the LOB will be increasing about $12 million this year. That's a large dollar amount that equates to 6.9%. I think it's important, though, that we understand and put that 6.9% in perspective. First of all, the increase from enrollment growth. And this is not only enrollment growth as you count them for that $40,316 per student base state aid, but it's also the enrollment growth we've had in bilingual education and vocational school, all the other growth that occurs that have weighting factors associated with them. That's 7.2%. And the increase from base state aid, which was supported by the state legislature, which actually provides for the increase to address inflation and other cost pressures on our budgets, is about 1.1%. If you look at that real quickly, it doesn't really add up because the whole budget's going up 6.9%, and 7.2% is associated with the growth. What that really means is that all the other factors, namely the extraordinary growth, that was reduced this year by $5 million. New facility weighting, we're not opening as many, I mean, a lot of the facilities that were on the rolls in the past are now falling off. That was reduced by a couple million. So in essence, all the other factors actually had a negative impact on the growth of the budget. And so I think it's important to understand that what we were able to do with this budget in meeting needs for students, in meeting needs for our staff, and in compensation and benefits is, I think, very positive in light of the fact that the dollars that were raised not only provided for current staff, but also for all the new students, which account for 7.2% of this growth. So I think it's you're to be commended for how we've been able to put this together and make it work for our organization. Finally then, and that's the conclusion, this evening we are here for a public hearing to allow people in the community to have comments to the board, after which, if the board has any other questions, we can address those, and then we'd be willing to entertain a motion to approve the budgets. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Is there any questions for Mr. Diener?
Mr. Diener, if you would just, for the sake of clarity for everyone, distinguish between the 750 student growth provision in the budget versus the 450 FTE contingency that's in there as well.
Yes. One of the things that we always do is we build a budget and we make allocations. We determine what salary increases we can afford, so to speak, what additional teachers we can afford, what new programs we can provide for to scale based on an operating budget. And that's what the 750 students are. We don't want to create an operating budget and commit contracts to a budget that's based on more students than we might realize. We'd much rather go the other way around. So the operating budget is built on 750 students. The reality is that if we publish a budget that is only 750, then there's a good chance that if we receive 800 students, then we would not have published a budget large enough to realize the authority to spend the dollars, to hire the additional teachers and do whatever we need to do to meet that additional need. And so there's a difference between an operating budget and a published budget. So what we have historically done is created an operating budget, 750, then built into the published budget an additional 400, 450 students for the eventuality that we will receive those students, and then we have the authority to use those additional dollars that will come from the state for the purpose of meeting student needs.
So then any growth over 1,200 students would require us to do something incremental.
Another publication, correct.
Okay, great, thanks.
Good question. Anyone else? Okay, no more questions from board members. Thank you, Mr. Diener. This is a public hearing on the budget, and we'll open the floor for public comments. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to the board with public comments regarding the budget? Seeing no one, then we'll declare the public hearing closed. And now, board, will move on to action regarding the budget. Are there any questions, comments, or anyone willing to make a motion based on what we have learned over these several months, and especially these last few?
The only comment I would have is how well this is put together in, again, layman's terms, for us for others to understand, and I will say for me to understand also. So thank you, Mr. Diener, for the time spent in doing that.
I would just echo that, Mr. Diener and staff, for all your work, and I would commend the board. It fits my two criteria, and I have many, but it fits two of them very, very well, and that's being reasonable and being responsible. I think it's reasonable for our taxpayers, our community, what we're trying to do in terms of fulfilling our mission, and I think it's very responsible in terms of trying to respond to the growing needs we have in our community and the changing population, the demographics, the capital needs, all those packages put together. So for me, it meets both those criteria very, very well. And unless there's other discussion, I would make a motion to approve this budget as set before us and to authorize budgets for submission to the Kansas State Department of Education and the county clerk for certification.
Thank you, Dr. Drummond. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Any further discussion?
I just wanted to have one comment before we call the question, and that is also my compliment to staff, Dr. All, and your leadership in this, and also to the board members. I know we've all worked very hard on this, and we've all brought our ideas and suggestions to the table, and we've all listened to those, and we've all come to an understanding agreement in that process, and we've all grown in the process, and to that end, it's been a great team effort.
Great. Thank you. Seems like it should take longer than 5 minutes to do this after all this time, right?
It's kind of like Thanksgiving dinner. It takes hours to fix it and about 20 minutes to eat it.
Well, if there are no more comments, Mrs. Carpenter, we have a motion on the floor. Would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Wilhelm,
Yes.
Ms. Ashley,
Yes.
Mr. Churchman,
Yes.
Dr. Drummond,
Yes.
Mr. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Parker,
Yes.
And the motion passes. We have an approved budget. Thank you, Mr. Diener.